Thank you, madam. A very good morning to you all, and we go into the second day of our meeting conference. And this session, as you have heard, we will focus on economic and social development aspects of post-conflict Afghanistan, slightly distinct from what we done yesterday, which was to focus on security and politics. We're all aware that a war, any war, ends when only both sides say it has. In the case of Afghanistan, we've seen from the discussions yesterday, 2014 is going to be an important watershed year. And how? Why? In three main ways. And in this connection, I want to say something. Last evening, while talking to some of my Afghan friends, I was asked what were the commonalities and the differences with Bangladesh, which is another country on the other extreme of the subcontinent, intensely Muslim, very Muslim country, which was born of war devastation. It was totally devastated when it at its nascence. So a country, 90% Muslim, war-torn, etc., had to face some, in many ways, common problems as Afghanistan does today. In 71, as many of us know, that Kissinger had described Bangladesh as a basket case. Today, the dependence on foreign support, foreign aid in Bangladesh has reduced from about 90% in 1971 to about 80% of development budget, and that too mainly bank credits from multilateral banks. A very conservative country has succeeded largely in empowering women, mainstreaming gender, and also change the sort of attitude towards social reforms. Very successful population policy measures, for instance. Bangladesh, as many of you know, was a larger country than Pakistan in terms of population in 71. Today, a great pride of Bangladesh is that it's a smaller country in terms of population. Three main challenges I think Afghanistan confronts in that context. One is building, and we discussed some of these yesterday, building institutions of good governance on a matrix of appropriate physical and administrative infrastructure. That's number one. Number two, there would need to be the deepening of the, and this is very important, deepening of the absorptive capacity of foreign aid. Yesterday we talked of $10 billion or so coming into Afghanistan in 2014. But we've all seen that post-Gleneagles in G8, when about $7 billion were poured into Afghanistan, into Africa, because there were no prepared projects in Africa. There was too much money chasing too few projects, resulting in the consequences we all can understand. And number three would be stimulating a sense of national enthusiasm for development by empowering women, mainstreaming gender, and creating an inclusive society, very important, inclusive society, embracing the less privileged in the community, in the society, and those who are socially more deprived. Now, to speak to these important issues, we have four very upright Afghan minds, luminaries, all of them, who will share with us reflections on the subjects that, on these subjects, and I shall introduce them one by one as I give them the floor. And I shall begin with Mr. Shahmahmood Miakhel, who's the country director for United States Institute of Peace. He has been that since 2009, a native of Afghanistan, of course. He was elected to the emergency lawyer jirga in 2002, published books in Pashto on Afghan issues, has an MBA from Preston University in Pakistan, completed a fellowship program on democracy development and rule of law at Stanford in 2006. Mr. Miakhel has also participated in US-Saudi leadership programs in the Kennedy School. Mr. Miakhel.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mr. Chowdhury, and good morning to everybody. We just describe it very well because how do we link security governance in development? That is more important things in Afghanistan. As Ibn Qutayba, Islamic scholar in the 9th century, he just said there can be no government without an army, no army without money, no money without prosperity, and no prosperity without justice and good administration. Because everything goes back to a good administration, not how much money we have, how much we don't have it. So it all depends how to use the money in the right way. Before I just go in details, I will just talk about some myths which is existing among the international community about Afghanistan, or Afghans, and also what are the myths among the Afghans that exist about the international community. As Minister Jalani once just said, so international community Afghans are two partners, but unfortunately they don't understand each other very well. So the myths among the international community is Afghanistan has never had a functional government. Afghans don't know how to practice democracy and see it as perfectly acceptable to make deals with warlords and power brokers, or in some cases even with non-criminals. Since the Afghan government is weak and doesn't have a control beyond Kabul, it is willing to make deals with the local warlords. The government doesn't function because there is a lack of capacity and absence of large institutions to govern. So the Afghanistan government doesn't function because of it is an effectual centralized system or unitary system. The best thing to do to just go ignore the central government and work with the peripheries. Corruption is part of the Afghan culture. These are the myths which is existing among the international community. But the Afghan also have a myths about the international community in the country. Counter-terrorism is excused by the international community, especially the U.S., to control the region in order to have access to Central Asian natural resources. The U.S. wants to have a long-term presence in Afghanistan in order to stop Chinese influence in the region. The U.S. is in Afghanistan to have control over extractive mines and natural resources in Afghanistan. In order for the international community to stay in Afghanistan, they want to keep the status quo, to justify their presence, even if it means supporting both the Taliban and the Afghan government. These are myths existing among the people in the country. The presence of the international community is conspiracy against the Pashtun ethnic group in the region, which explains why a majority of fighting is in Pashtun areas on both sides of the borders. The main purpose of the international community presence in Afghanistan is to destabilize the region, which is why they support both Afghan government and Taliban. This idea is more in the rural areas existing there. The international communities in Afghanistan is part of larger conspiracy to destroy Islam. So these are the myths which is the Taliban and other recruit people for one reason or another. So I want to talk a little bit about these myths. When people say there's no functional government, before 1978, we have seen functional government in Afghanistan. A police without arms, they can bring anybody from very remote part of the country. If somebody they want to recall to the government officer or somebody complain against somebody, nobody can say I cannot come to the government. You could travel in the country during day and night, there was no problem. Most of the, especially in the decade of democracy, most of the governors, prime ministers, and ministers, all of them were just reached to those positions not by favor or something, but just by merit, by hard work and skills. And people still talk about those people who were not corrupt in those years. I just give you one example. Justice Azimi, who is the current Chief Justice, he told us during Dawood Khan time, President Dawood, one professor in Kabul University, he just failed his daughter because he didn't make very well in the exam. And many people approached to him to just, to pass her. But he said, no, I didn't fail her because she is the daughter of the president. I just failed her because she didn't do very well. So eventually, President Dawood learned about that. They called the professor and appreciated, his courage that failed his daughter, and eventually he appointed him as a Minister of Higher Education. So this showed we knew how to have a functioning government, how to have a fight corruption, and many people, I just said, those who were not corrupt in those years, still people talk about highly about those people, those governors, ministers, and others. There are some other myths which is, I talk about that Afghanistan, has a centralized system, and actually I just give you an example because the question is not the model of government. The question is who's running the model. We have all kinds of models in the world. For example, Singapore, Malaysia, the model here is also not very democratic model, but prosperous because the leaders of this country, they did better for the people. And they established a system and it's functioning here. So I always argue if you are sitting in a Mercedes-Benz new one or if you want Toyota, but if you go on the wrong side of the highway, the model doesn't make any difference. The only difference is you reach to the head faster if you are in the new model. So always you have to, many say that the capacity is not existing in the government. This is also not good because the current capacity in Afghanistan, I'm not saying always you have to build your capacity, always you have to improve institution, always you have to, improve the laws and others. But with the existing laws, with the existing institution, with existing capacity, we can do better. But if you appoint good people in the right positions, that is more important, to have a political will to really make changes in the country. Because political will is more important. And that's the leadership issue. They have to aspire people for national unity. And this is also very good. I give you some example. For example, the local institution of Afghanistan is very based on democratic institutions, the Jarga, Shuras, and others in the country. So equality is existing. But unfortunately, they were imposed undemocratic system on the people of Afghanistan. And people either reacted or just uprised against them, or it will be indifferent, not to cooperate with the government. Because if you just go since 2001, from Bonn Agreement to emergency law jarga, constitutional law jarga, elections, the decision of the people were undermined. So people were not allowed to make a decision. And they participated in all these processes. But unfortunately, after each process, because of fraud, coercion, and intimidation, and so many other things, so they lost the legitimacy, the government, and also the process in the country. I just, because of the time, I will go faster because so some just say, the Afghan government is very weak or doesn't have a control beyond the Kabul. I personally see this government is much stronger because the support they get from the national support, international support, this government, no government in the history of Afghanistan has that much support. But unfortunately, the government really used their support. It does not mean the Taliban is very stronger. But the question is, the government, with all these resources, support, they appease few people, and they ignore the rest of the population. And so if they just use these resources and support in the right way, the things can be changed very quickly in the country. If you just travel in the country in Afghanistan, if you ask people, how was your life 10 years ago and now, everybody will say it is, differences is good. Things is happen economically in others. Even I just see Rebecca, she's sitting here and was in Kandahar province. Even in my lifetime, I couldn't imagine I have that many bridges or roads in my own village. It will happen. It's happened. But the problem is that Afghanistan is facing is a depression, or I call it international depression. The reason is that those who are in the government not happy, outside of the government not happy, who are rich not happy, poor are not happy, international community is not happy. There are some problems. The problem is first is miscommunication or between the government and international community. They undermine each other. And they are partners like two sides of the same coin. But each one thinks we are separate from each other. It doesn't work in Afghanistan like that. No matter whatever you just see, people say, okay, this government is supported by the international community. So they cannot separate from each other in this way. So the second myth about the Afghans, they think about the international community. Yes, the international community might have some economic or strategic objectives, one way or another, but Afghanistan is not only one country, they can save the whole region, because we saw the recent mining and other contracts which went to the Chinese companies because the US investors are not interested or not to take a risk to invest in Afghanistan at that time. And also, the US is coming to Afghanistan, some people is very planned and they stay here forever and all these things. We know in the West, in the capital, the stamina is not that much, to stay here for longer, even to contribute billions of dollars every year to Afghanistan. It's not possible, But the stability of Afghanistan is more important for Afghanistan and also for the region, and also for the international community. Because why the international community came to Afghanistan? Because Afghanistan was unstable. It's become unstable, then become a safe haven for Al-Qaeda and others. And so you don't want to go back to that stage again. That is the only fear that one really confused about the future. What will happen after 2014? The institution will stay in power, will exist or not, or will be, because of lack of resources and others, we will go back to the civil war. Because I remember when in Geneva, in 1988, when the agreement was signed, Cordovez, he just came to Peshawar to meet with the Afghan refugees, and he just, in that time my father was speaking, and he just told me, yes, you signed the agreement, but after the agreement you just came on to consult with us, You should have come before the agreement to sign the. So, but the problem is this agreement cannot solve our problem. The problem of Afghanistan. Refugees cannot return back, and war cannot stop in Afghanistan. So he just talked again, and he just said, yes, this agreement is just for the Soviet withdrawal, not for solving the Afghan problems. So now the question is, the transition is for reducing forces or exit strategy or really solving the problem of Afghanistan cannot go back to the civil war. Because this is very important for the Afghans in the future. In conclusion, yes, our neighbors, we cannot choose neighbors by choice. You can choose friends by choice. You want it or don't want it, but neighbors, we have it. Even if we are in good term or bad term, but we have to live together, we have to exist in Afghanistan. But one thing is very important. In 1973, the same neighbor, the Dewan Musliman or the Islamic Brotherhood, people, they went to Pakistan, and at that time was supported and trained by the government of Iftekhar Chowdhury in that time, and they sent it to Afghanistan to uprise against the government of President Dawood. They attacked, the government positions, offices in Panjshir, Laghman, Kunar, and Paktika, in those places. But in just in 2 days and one night, all this uprising was suppressed. The same leaders, which is, Rabbani Hikmatyar and others, they were in Peshawar in that time. Because there was no gap, there was a gap distance between the people and the government. And people supported the government. So the Pakistan training, equipment, and money didn't work. But later on, when the governance is collapsed in Afghanistan after 1978, yes, this training and money and others supported the Mujahideen. They destabilized Afghanistan, and even now is the absence of governance. If you just look, Taliban emerged in the absence of governance, the Mujahideen emerged in the absence of governance, the insurgency in Afghanistan is an absence of governance in the rural area. So that is very important, no matter how much support we get from the international community, because in the last 30 years, I don't know exactly the figure, but $73 billion, whatever the Soviet Union spent in Afghanistan, and now the hundreds of billions of dollars by the international community, the West and other countries, Islamic countries, they spend in Afghanistan. Afghanistan problem is not solved by money. So money is not solution for everything, but we have to design our governance system according to the need of Afghanistan. I just always give one example for election. So in this election, we spend about $200–300 million. doesn't have legitimacy. But in 2002, when we had an election for emergency law Jirga, I was involved in the election for eastern provinces and 4 provinces. The whole election cost was about $100,000. So compare that election with $200 million. So that election had a more legitimacy in that time compared to $200 million we spent. So the design of the government is also a response. We should have a vision how to run the government. And that vision is missing because I gave an example always, Afghanistan has become like an engine. If engine is broke, change driver 20 times cannot go anywhere. You have to fix the system. And the system now, it is open just, it is easy to open the engine and screw, all the nuts and bolts. But put together the engine, it is not easy, especially if you have parts from 40 different countries and others, models. It doesn't work in Afghanistan. So we Afghans, the Afghan government, they have to design a governance system which is really can sell it to the people of Afghanistan, and also it will be cost effective and sustainable in the long run. For example, like you mentioned in Bangladesh cases, now we just maybe collect 30% of our revenue. But 70% of the revenue in the country is going to the pockets of different people. If we just collect our own revenue, we will be able to cover our running costs, and also will have some money for the developments in the country. And that way, we will be in the strong term. We can ask the international community to give us more. And then we can have a more development in the country. That all, whatever is I just said, the essence is that the good governance is the important piece of everything. Transition, stability in Afghanistan, developments, stability in the region, and also with the international community. And good governance cannot happen without good leadership. And we are hoping 2014 in Afghanistan, there will be a transparent election in the country, because that is more important than the security transition in the country. If that has happened, then we will create a new momentum for good governance and accountability. And that way, we all will be on the right track. If we miss that opportunity in 2014 again, for political transition in the country, everything will be failed after that. That's my hope, and we have to plan for that now, not to just reach to 2014 and then say, okay, bring changes, the election, and this and others. We have to think about Afghan and also international community has to think about that right now, how the political transition happened in 2014. That is more important than anything else. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miakhel. I think you do a very good job in demolishing what is seen as some received wisdom in the case of Afghanistan, which is not necessarily so. You demolish those myths, and you emphasize on how small changes can make large differences. And your concluding thesis that governance, good governance, is key to the resolution of the many problems of Afghanistan is absolutely on point. Next we will have Madame Rangina Hamidi, who is the president of Kandahar Treasure. It's a women's enterprise. She's a very successful entrepreneur. Where women are concerned, employs about 300 women in Kandahar Treasure. She's one of those, we talked of gender mainstreaming earlier, who is spearheading this movement to associate the women in Afghanistan in this enthusiasm for development. She's lived in America, in the United States, she's lived in Pakistan. She has been recognized by the media. She was one of the 18 finalists for the CNN 2007 Hero Award and Personality of the Week. She was acknowledged as that by the Radio Free Europe in January 2008. Madam, for the next 20 minutes, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Before I begin, I would like to take a moment to thank the Institute, but most especially Shanti, for giving the platform to Afghans. This is really, honestly, the first conference or event of its kind where the majority of presenters are Afghans, and I think we're already beginning the transition for 2014 by giving a platform to Afghans. So thank you, Shanti, for doing this. developments and achievements of the past 10 years. I would like to begin with a positive note that there are plenty, as my colleague Mr. Miakhel has pointed out. A lot has changed in Afghanistan, whether people recognize it or not. Of course, the pessimism and negativity overpowers because I think people are frustrated with the lack of change that they would like to see on a daily basis. But there are a lot of changes that must be noted. Roads, schools, for example, training and educational opportunities for many young Afghans especially. Yesterday this was noted, and I see this over and over again, where young men and young Afghan women now with not only the linguistic ability of speaking in English to communicate to the world, but the educational opportunities that they've taken advantage of in the past 10 years have really transformed the next generation or the new generation of Afghans that the international community will be looking forward to. So this is all a product of what has been invested in Afghanistan for the past 10 years. And we have to recognize the fact that in spite of the shortcomings, there are efforts to improve and enhance training capacities for police and military, as well as good governance. There's an attempt. There might be shortcomings in it, but there is an attempt to improve that. But in the light of the decision around 2014, Afghans and experts in Afghanistan are pondering upon the following questions. Number one, has the aid delivered since 2001 achieved its goals of helping the Afghan people? And if yes, how effective has it been? What lessons can we learn from the past 10 years of development to take Afghanistan beyond 2014? What role can women play in developing their nation and communities? And finally, what success stories are there to give hope in the midst of a very chaotic and uncertain period in Afghan history? I would like to take a moment, although I know that yesterday we talked about this, not to focus too much on the past, but the past is important to learn on how to take better steps for the future. So specifically in terms of development, the history of aid in Afghanistan really began, the modern version of aid in Afghanistan began with the time period of Afghans becoming refugees to Pakistan, Iran, and other nations when Russia invaded in 1979. And so the concept of aid that began at that time was very political. And it was political because the assistance came through supporting the Mujahideen, who were fighting against the Russians or the communists. And most of the aid came to refugee camps, whether in Pakistan or Iran, to support the refugees. Because there was no system in place, because there was no infrastructure for how this aid was to be delivered, automatically the Mujahideen commanders, who just sprang about, became the point of contact for a lot of aid to the communities to make contact with and have them deliver the aid to their communities. Now, because the war was going on and there was really no infrastructure for monitoring the aid, it is only natural that human error or that human greed plays in, and many commanders unfortunately took advantage of the opportunity and took aid to themselves and their families and their communities rather than evenly and equally spreading it among the communities. A great example that I remember, I was only about 4 years old when my family left Afghanistan to become refugees in Pakistan and Quetta. A few days after, or maybe a week or 10 days after we moved, we were forced out of the country to go to Pakistan. My father, who was an accountant by nature and who was working with the Ministry of Finance at the time with Daud Khan's government, he was given the position by the heads of camps, the refugee camps in Pakistan, in Sokhab to be specific, to become the, I don't know the title at that time, but probably a coordinator of a camp. And what this position or this career would mean is that the aid packages that were meant to come to the refugees, he would be in charge of it. And he could allocate some to the people, but because there was no monetary system, he could actually take all of it in, sell it or misuse it, and he would make a great career out of it. Fortunately, my father was a man of great conscience, and he refused and rejected that position, but many people didn't. I mean, he was lucky enough to have an education background and the will to work for his living, but many people didn't have that, and so they took that opportunity and became heads of camps, and a lot of aid was misused in that way. So ill-experienced, ill-visioned, self-created leaders assumed leadership positions and began creating, later became NGOs. So NGO was not, initially, aid was coming through, and then the aid community obviously had rules and regulations to give funding and aid and projects to NGOs, couldn't give it to individuals. So these self-created leaders who then later learned to create NGOs didn't really create nonprofit organizations for the purpose of helping the needs of the community, but rather they knew that there was aid available to be given to these communities, and so by creating an NGO, you basically were, you were creating a business for yourself. To get the funds, some of them could do projects, and when I speak, please don't take it as I'm speaking generally. Of course, there's exceptions, but generally people took this money as their business money and kept it for themselves, and that's how corruption continued on with the aid process. There was a term in Pashto, there's a jab is your pocket. And NGO, the locals started calling NGOs NGOs, meaning your NGO money that was coming in actually went to the pocket instead of the communities, and that was just an analogy to explain how corruption actually did happen, that it indeed go to the pockets of people. The continuation of political aid through the Mujahideen period, and once the Russians left, the Mujahideen commanders that became in charge, it allowed the opportunity for Afghanistan to officially have projects to be active in the country, mostly in the rural areas because the cities were still under communist, the Najibullah's government. But in the rural communities, it was still the Mujahideen commanders in control. In Kandahar, I use an example because that's where I work and that's where I'm from. In the Arghandab district, Mullah Naqib, who's a famous commander who passed away a couple of years ago, was actually the main advisor for UN, for international organizations, to seek his advice as to what was needed for the Kandahar region. And I'm not here to make a statement about how good or bad Mullah Naqib was, but he was not trained to be a development agent for the community. His training was to fight and to win a war. He was not, a social advocate for the people of the region. He did not know issues about women. He did not, he couldn't plan out activities for people in need. But yet the international community used him as the main person to allocate its funding and projects to the community. And so when you use people like that, you obviously are being biased and very selective as how you want your community, your funding to be used. That trend has continued on to 2001. America comes to Afghanistan with lots and lots of money. We've received more funding in the past 10 years than probably in the history of Afghanistan. Of course, the government always complains that it's not enough. But as Mr. Miakhel said, it's the quality of the aid and how it's spent that's important rather than the quantity. Gulab Shirzai in Kandahar, who was the de facto war leader / governor, who became, he became the aid distributor in the region with no expertise, no background in how aid and development should happen. Mullah Naqib's son, who's alive today, still continues to be the point person by ISAF / NATO to contact on what kind of aid and help is necessary or needed by the community. Military still predominantly holds development. Most of development money still comes through military. That is already a politicization of aid, and how you can effectively bring change in the community is a question that we can all answer. Lack of coordination. This is another problem that we've seen throughout the history. I'll give a very simple but a very beautiful example of how lack of coordination has basically destroyed the effectiveness of aid in the country. In 2005, GTZ, which is a German aid organization, came to Kandahar in the month of July, bringing $1 million, US dollars, to be spent on women's projects. And this money had to be spent by December 31st of the same year. So we have less than 5 months to spend $5 million without an assessment, without communicating or talking to people in the region GTZ had to immediately give out contracts to people that didn't even exist in Kandahar. We had health projects that were managed from Kabul by people who hadn't even seen Kandahar, yet the project was given and it had to be implemented, and they wrote a beautiful report by the end of December, and GTZ looked very good. But one project of GTZ was to build a dormitory for female students at Kandahar University. Great idea, great project. However, at that time, there were only 8 female students in Kandahar University out of 820, and none of them lived or had the permission to live in a dormitory. So fine, even if you buy the argument that they would, in the future, as the population of students grow, in the future there could be female students to live in dormitories, built the dormitory, locked it up because there was nobody to use it, and years went by, and then in 2007, UNOPS, a great UN organization they're supposed to know everything in the country, right? They built up yet another dormitory right next to the already empty built dormitory for girls again in Kandahar, at Kandahar University. So when I was asked by a newspaper to report on this, I obviously made it public and said that this money from GTZ went down to, was wasted, it went down the drain. The ambassador of Germany in Kabul got mad, I get calls, and of course, the story was basically dropped, but the idea of behind the story is that in 2012, right now, Kandahar University still has no single female student living in a dormitory with 2 dormitories built for them. Plus, the students, the male students who do live in dormitories don't have electricity to study in their rooms. My late father, who was a mayor of Kandahar city, was encouraged and convinced donors to build street lights, solar lights for the city. And once I was driving by accident on the road to university, and there are solar lights throughout the road, there were 3 students sitting in a row under each solar light studying at night because they don't have lights in their rooms to study. This should be enough of a question for us to think where has the aid money gone and how effective it has been in Afghanistan. I want to come to the psychology of aid in my country, and this might be a bit harsh for some of us Afghans, but this is the reality and this is my assessment of where we are. The general Afghan psyche has divorced itself from any responsibility towards our own community and our own country, unfortunately. Many wait to be spoon-fed because we've been spoon-fed for the past 30, 40 years. Lack of security and uncertainty and of the future, along with a complete lack of trust on the current government, push Afghans to be more selfish and only prepared for a tomorrow that might be worse. And that is understandably so, because if we don't have a promising future, you only want to get as much as you can today, because tomorrow you might be stuck in a position where you might have to fight. Lawlessness and lack of accountability leads people to literally get away with murder, and people have gotten away with murder. There is absolutely no accountability for what action one takes. So mishandling of funds, misusing aid money has become a minute problem in the vast ocean of problems that we have in Afghanistan. Role models for many NGO heads are corrupt ministers, corrupt governors, and the like. If they can get away with it, then why shouldn't these small guys? Really, it's a question of perspective. If our ministers are stealing and getting away with it, our governors are stealing and getting away with it, then these small NGO heads are only a small problem of that. The recipients of aid see all of this and have taken a backseat and demand that their misfortune calls for a complete dependence on aid, and hence expect the international community to help them from A to Z. No initiative from people in the community whatsoever. This mentality further feeds to handicap the mind and body to take any action to free themselves from being beggars. This is a paralysis from creativity and self-sufficiency. Knowing this mentality and knowing this psychology, I was working with a nonprofit organization from 2003 until 2008. And we began we began a project within the nonprofit, and we call it the Women's Income Generation Project. And year after year, it was the same redundant mundane, write a proposal, get the funding, finish the project, write your reports, and then the next year it's the same thing over again. And I got tired of it. So finally we decided that we were not going to be like that anymore, and that we were going to use the 5 years expertise and skill and training that we received in the work that we were doing to transform the income generation project into a business, to make it self-sustainable and to make it long-lasting. Because the aid money, we realized even in 2008 that the international community was not going to be in Afghanistan forever. Eventually they were going to leave, eventually the funding was going to be cut off. So we took our income generation project and transformed it into a business and named it Kandahar Treasure, primarily for the purpose of giving value to the work of Afghan people. We didn't want to feel that we were these victims of everybody feeling sorry for us, that these poor women cannot do anything by themselves, and they're living at the mercy of aid and international community all the time. But instead, we looked at the work that the capacity and the skill that we had with this beautiful hand embroidery in Kandahar region, and we utilized that to create a business that would not only showcase our beautiful skill and artwork to the world, but at the same time bring in income. And so right now we are operated and owned by over 350 women in Kandahar province. It's the first private women's enterprise in Kandahar, and we are making history. We are home-based, meaning the majority of our women work from their homes, and how they're paid is by piece. So if you complete a piece of work, we pay by that piece. But of course, the 17 women who work in the production site get a salary, and it's a very humble salary. It's not by any international standards or NGO standards, high salaries. We have fine hand embroidery. This is an example, and I have more at the end. You're welcome to come and see it. A lot of people cannot believe it's handwork because it is that perfect. But yet we are marketing our products nationally and internationally to bring the income needed to support and sustain this initiative. And since 2010 and 2011, it's the first 2 years that we've actually made profit. People are not recognizing the work of Kandahari women all throughout the world now, and the women themselves have taken the work as their courage and as their identity to prove that we are agents of change in our own families, in our own society, in our own community. Of course, there were hurdles on the way. We were constantly competing with NGOs that continue to train women on a skill that they already know. Girls learn the skill in Kandahar when they're 6 and 7. But NGOs to this day waste money on training women. Why do we need to train somebody who already knows something? But it's the trend, because that's where money is and that's how people want to waste money. But we instead stayed away from that. We produce products to sell. We don't just store them or give it out to the women at the end of the project. And we are long-term. We're not a short-term project that gives a lot of money for 3 months and then there's no money after 3 months. We give little, but we give little for a very long time, and we've been in existence for the past 9 years, and we hope to continue for as much, for as long as we possibly can. Today, when many NGOs are finally shutting down their offices, the women are finally getting it, that what we're doing as a business is really what is going to make a difference in their lives. The men support our work because we are culturally sensitive. It is home-based initiative, so we're not asking men or women, we're not asking people to do something out of the ordinary, and we do not waste our resources. A great successful story is that of Mogul, who is a mother of 6 daughters and 2 sons. When I first met her in 2003, she had no place to live. She was living in a room of a neighbor or a friend's family with no roof. They had a plastic sheet. The morning that I met her, the night before, it had rained for the first time in Kandahar after many years, and so the plastic sheet had fallen in their room. And the family had to split in the middle of the night to go to different people's homes because they couldn't sleep under the rain. So in the morning when I met her, she immediately started, she was crying, and then we immediately started our relationship. Her daughter started working 8 years later now. She doesn't own, but she rents a 3-bedroom apartment home today, where her daughters are still working. She's able to buy her food, pay her rent, buy all the medicine and clothing necessities of the family. Her husband is still not working, by the way, after 8 years still. And in the 8 years time that she's been working with us, she's been able to buy time for her daughter's marriage age. Meaning when we started working with her daughters, the older daughters were about 14, 15. Her oldest daughter just got married a couple months ago. So this, change in the marriage age is an indirect effect, a positive social effect of, development work that we didn't plan out. This was not part of our mission to do, but indirectly we're changing the social values of the society, which are important not only for health reasons, but also for the future of Afghanistan, because we are still, I think, the #2 mortality rate in the world, and with this kind of an initiative, we can slowly begin to change those results. Finally, I want to focus on, Kandahar Treasure as an example, obviously, of what can happen in the middle of a very volatile region like Kandahar if we can make a sustainable women's business in Kandahar region. I think that should be motivation enough for people to carry out similar projects and initiatives throughout the country. And I would like to end by saying that women from now on should be seen as agents of change, that we're not just merely individuals or liability on family and the country to treat as second-class citizens as we have been treated, because we really can make the difference. From an economics perspective, the Goldman Sachs of the world or other companies in the world are finally realizing and recognizing that investment in women is smart economics, because they see that the return to the society, to the community, is much larger when they invest in women rather than the men. And I'm sorry, men, but this is the truth. The education and the social values, if you look at Afghanistan, like I said, more and more women. Of course, there are a lot of, great percentage of women and girls are still banned from going to school, even though we don't have Taliban in control officially, but it's a cultural thing. But yet the women who have taken the opportunity to educate themselves, they've really gone beyond the expectations of the society and their families. Many are seeking PhDs, they have masters. And this is a reality of what we see, that when you give a woman a chance, she will take that chance to the greatest opportunity that she can. Politically, it's the women who are raising the voice of ordinary Afghans. While the men are fighting over seats and power and who gets what power and which position in the government ministries, it's the women, whether they're in the parliament or in other government positions or NGOs, who are really raising the voices of Afghans, ordinary Afghans, to the world. Security sector. Another, we as women feel like an untapped resource because we really can provide and help with the security sector that unfortunately not our government nor the international community, ISAF, NATO, focuses on, because ISAF has been told, oh, you can't touch or work with Afghan women, leave them alone because they don't know anything about security. But in fact, if you look at the history, especially of the Pashtun culture, Pashtun women have historically proven themselves with records and with examples where in community feuds or family feuds on a community level, the Pashtun women, usually an older woman, would come to the jirga and beg, literally with her scarf, beg the leaders or the decision makers to end the dispute with whatever she had to whatever she had to offer. And as a sign of respect, the men had to obey her and listen to her. And more than often, the dispute would be ended in favor of the women. So I don't see why we cannot use that same example of using women, utilizing older women in communities to start addressing the issue of terrorism and the Taliban fighting or insurgents to stop this nonsense of a war. The government can definitely tap into this resource, or the international community can definitely tap into this resource. But of course, with the right and the pure intention, not as a project-based, okay, let's work with women and see if this works. No, because that's not how it's going to work. But if we're serious about really ending the security problem in Afghanistan, we need to be serious about addressing the security issue from a very cultural and a very local perspective. The old notion of women cannot do it is untrue, period. I, as a woman, as an Afghan woman, will no longer accept the fact that I'm unable to help my country because the men say so. You know, like I said, we're educated, we're trained, we have the capacity, and if I ever hear this argument again of women are not qualified, I want to question the international community. How many of the men in Afghanistan who are working, who are the point of contacts for the international community, how many of them are really qualified in terms of education, experience, or any of the others? So if you're working with illiterate, war commanders, war-hungry men, why can't you work with women who might not have the experience, but at least they haven't killed other people? So finally, a solution for the future of how aid can be better. I have four suggestions, and if taken into consideration, it might help the future development activities in Afghanistan. Number one, I suggest that an independent national and provincial planning and monitoring body be created to coordinate aid projects. I think we're lacking any kind of coordination body at this point to really address this issue of what is necessity and what isn't, and to stop reinventing the wheel all over Afghanistan. Number two, the mission of aid should be long-term and not charity-based. We're sick and tired of quick impact, let's win the hearts and minds of people. I think 10 years is enough of that. If we really seriously want to develop Afghanistan, let's think about 50 years, 100 years planning periods, not just 6 months or 3-month periods. Let's invest in new strategies and new partners. Break the corruption of cycle. If Mullah Naqib's son is a good friend and NATO wants to use him for fighting and killing more people, fine, do that. But let's not make him be the development advisor for Afghanistan, because he's not. He's our enemy. And I don't want my enemy to be my development advisor. And finally, let's please depoliticize and demilitarize aid. Let's split these two completely. And what the military does is its own problems, and I'm not going to address that, but let us, the development workers, the people who want to build Afghanistan, really build it without any military or politics. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Hamidi. I think it's a very interesting presentation where you use examples and anecdotes to extrapolate very important conclusions, and you focus on 3 things really. I mean, first is the proper monitoring of aid utilization, and you offer those 4 suggestions at the end of your presentation. Very important, all of them. The sort of moving away from the pasha of the QIPs, the quick impact projects, which is generally something in the mind of people when they address an issue in a post-conflict situation. Identifying the right people for leadership, I mean, weeding out of the Mullah Naqibs, for example, or actually even transforming Mullah Naqibs, because sometimes, I mean, you have to transform the leaders in these post-conflict situations rather than look for new leaders because they're rare to come by. But we've seen similar situations in Africa, for instance, where the next generation hopefully will be more development-oriented. And thirdly, evolution of the new kind of NGOs or non-governmental organizations, CSOs as they're called now, civil society organizations, in consonance with the unique needs of Afghanistan, because you have to have CSOs. In Afghanistan, the government will not be able to tackle all the problems of development. But they must also bear in mind, as you very rightly say, the cultural sensitivities of the Afghan people, but with a view to changing them. And your presentation, madam, is ample proof that the change has begun. Okay. Now, next we have Mr. Mohammed Sabir Siddiqi, who is the Director of Development and Public Awareness and has served as a senior advisor to the anti-corruption agency in Afghanistan. He has made important contributions in various international conferences, largely dealing with anti-corruption drive, written articles on political thought, decentralization, and Afghanistan, has been educated in International Islamic University in Islamabad, and also has been awarded a Fulbright scholarship to study in the University of Oregon. Multilingual, speaks English, Dari, Pashto, and Arabic fluently. Yeah,
thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
After Rangina Jan's speech, I think she can help me, force me to say that sorry for being a man. First, I would like to thank the Institute of South Asian Studies for organizing this workshop, and I thank Ms. Shanti for including my name in the list of the speakers. I'm supposed to talk about the traditional and modern forms of communication of strategic communication and public awareness during the transition period in Afghanistan. This is somehow related to my work, to what I do in Kabul, because I'm working with the Development Public Awareness. It is a global NGO working on peace building, governance, and public awareness. Strategic communication is very important in politics and also in counterinsurgency today in Afghanistan, because if the messages are not communicated to the people in an effective manner, we cannot win the hearts and minds of the people. And previously, as one of the scholars, Guluda, has said, he said that if there was a field in which we were definitely and infinitely more stupid than our opponents, it was propaganda. It means communicating our messages and raising awareness among the people to defeat our opponents. So I will take a few minutes to look at the process of the strategic communication in Afghanistan and the performance of the government of Afghanistan in the past 10 years, and also the performance of the government of Afghanistan in the transition period. And then I will suggest some recommendations I have gathered during my interviews and search in Kabul with the intellectuals and Afghan people. First, when we look at the performance of the government of Afghanistan and the international community in regard to the strategic communication and public awareness, we come to a conclusion stated by His Excellency Mr. Stanigla yesterday, that we failed in strategic communication, and we don't have strategic gains, and we only have tactical gains. It was not only the government of Afghanistan that failed in communicating messages to the people, in convincing the people, and soliciting their support, and winning their support towards the programs and agendas of the government. But also the international community did the same mistake. The UK Ministry of Defense confesses that the British government is not communicating key messages to the British or Afghan public about the purpose of its operations in Afghanistan effectively enough. Moreover, the Ministry of Defense, the British Ministry of Defense, they admit that Taliban are very successful and proactive in this field. After 2002, the government and international community relied massively on modern communication and use of the modern communication tools. And they ignored the traditional communication tools, mechanisms, and networks. The government failed to be superior to Taliban in using mosques, madrasas, jirgas, and diras. The jirgas organized in Afghanistan, the Loy jirgas, they were organized only in Kabul, and they were massively politicized. And people do not think that those jirgas are organized to communicate messages to the people, but they think that the government is organizing those jirgas to get the agendas approved by the people and remain in the power. According to the Ministry of Hajj and Religious Affairs in Afghanistan, there are 7,000 mosques registered with the Ministry of Hajj and Religious Affairs. Even those 7,000 mosques registered with the government, they are not controlled by the government. Even mosques in Kabul, they are operating against the government of Afghanistan, in the international community, in the foreign forces presence in Afghanistan. And in Afghanistan, we don't have only 7,000 mosques. There are more than one. According to the estimation made by Deputy Minister of Hajj and Religious Affairs, he said that we have more than 100,000 mosques in Afghanistan unregistered with the government, and they are all, or almost all of them, are in the hand of Taliban, and Taliban use them as a tool to spread their messages and to communicate with the people and to oppose the government agendas. The government were not successful in categorizing the audiences in Afghanistan, and also categorizing the media on the basis of the reach, coverage, and influence on the people. And also, the government did not have, when communicating with the people, there was no parameter identified, and they were just basing their communication and their programs on non-scientific basis. I mean, they do not use surveys. They just say that we should communicate this message in this way, in this manner, because we think that people are thinking so. They do not use surveys, and they do not base their programs and activities on scientific foundations. And, for example, they tailor their programs and communication for the South provinces on the assumption that the people in southern provinces of Afghanistan, they are religious. I mean, they are religious, but they are not more religious than the people in other provinces of Afghanistan. They didn't understand that they are traditional, not more religious than the people in other provinces of Afghanistan. And on the contrary, Taliban, they were successful, or more successful than the government in using both modern communication and traditional communication as well. Taliban, who banned TV, internet, in all sort of modern communication tools in their time in Afghanistan, now they are operating from mosques, using mosques, data, jirgas as the tool of the propaganda and winning the people's support, and also they use internet, Facebook, and they have websites, massive web presence in the internet. the government also couldn't fail to link effectively the messages they communicated to the people with Islam. Because and they did not task professionals and right people to do that. That's why people today, whatever comes from the government, whatever messages communicated from by the government to the people, because it is not colored with Islamic principles properly, they think that it is just similar to the messages communicated by the communist regime when they were reciting the verses of Holy Quran and also quoting from the hadiths from the Prophet.